Over the years, we have featured many of our founding fathers, but all their stories come back to one man, George Washington. And for this reason, I want to look back at my favorite moments with the founding father, George Washington. I've had the incredible honor of cooking at his Mount Vernon estate, discovering the incredible story of his tent, and visiting the location of his only trip abroad. In this episode, we are paying homage by remembering some of the dishes prepared in his honor. Entrees such as pot au feu and crab meat stuffed surgeon for George Washington's taste of history. On A Taste of History, I have had many sentimental moments. But visiting Barbados, the only country that George Washington ever visited outside the colonies, had to be the most spectacular moment of them all.
At 19 years old, George Washington was just a young Virginian farmer and land surveyor, until a journey with his half-brother Lawrence Washington offered him a wealth of new opportunity.
Lawrence fell ill. He developed tuberculosis, and the doctors in Virginia said, "Look, Mr. Washington, there's only one hope of your survival. Go to the West Indies, go to the island of Barbados, which has very skilled doctors in treating diseases of the lung." In the 18th century, Barbados was a very wealthy colony. It was a very densely populated island. Bridgetown was one of the largest English colonized towns in the Americas. Even at the age of 19 and a half, George Washington was showing signs of becoming the very astute person that he later became in life.
His exposure to military life in Barbados undoubtedly ignited young Washington's interests in the field. But it was his exposure to smallpox on the island that changed the course of American history.
Smallpox is a very virulent disease which is very contagious. In that initial, very brief period of contact, George was unfortunate and developed smallpox. So he spent a couple of weeks in his chamber here in this house being attended to.
Imagine the outcome of the Revolutionary War if George Washington would have not contracted smallpox here in Barbados.
He could easily have died, but he didn't. And that is one of the really fascinating what-ifs of history. What would the United States of America have been like today? Had he died here, things would have changed radically. Had he not acquired smallpox immunity, when smallpox broke out among the troops of the army, he quite possibly could have contracted it and died along with the many other hundreds of his soldiers. But the reality is, he survived and he became the first president of the United States of America.
We visited Fort Pitt in Pittsburgh to learn about this fascinating story about George Washington, the British soldier.
Fort Pitt was established at the onset of the French and Indian War. After years of French occupation, this land saw a shift in ownership at the assistance of a young British officer, George Washington.
He was actually employed by the Ohio Company of Virginia to explain to the French that they were trespassing on what was believed to be then Virginia land. George Washington is in charge of the 1st Virginia Regiment in 1758 when the British are finally successful in gaining control of this land. This is the edge of the frontier in the early days of the French and Indian War, all the way up through the American Revolution.
Completed in 1761, Fort Pitt was not only a strategic fortification, but also an important post for trade between the English and the neighboring Native Americans.
I almost feel like I'm here trying to buy something. I actually talked to this guy about 3 times already. There are many moments on A Taste of History that are truly memorable. This happens to be one, especially that I get a cook for General Washington. Now we're going to start a recipe which I'm sure would have been served many, many times It would literally be whatever they get their hands on. A beef short ribs, marrow bone, lamb shanks. That's where the name comes from. Pot on fire, pot au feu, whatever you find, you throw it in there and you boil it or simmer it, depending. You don't want to overcook it completely. Pig foot, some short ribs, or any kind of beef you can get your hands on. A couple lamb shanks. And most important for the good flavor, a couple of marrow bones. Throw a few small baby carrots right in there. So I'm gonna cut up some potatoes real quick. Whatever they would have found at the time would have gone along with the pot au feu. I'm going to put this right into my boiling water behind me. I have carrots, I got an onion, mostly all root vegetables. You cut it in big chunks. Root vegetables would be the whatever you could find. Envision unkempt cooking. There wouldn't be any finesse. It was hearty. They were also pretty intelligent. They knew what would work together. Rutabaga, if you never had it, it's just a beautiful flavor of a vegetable. Now I'm going to throw this all into my stock behind there. And now all we're going to do, we're going to cut the Savoy cabbage. As soon as the cabbage is wilted, we're ready to serve up the meal. Salt, pepper, that's all it takes. All right. All the protein is cooked nicely, and I have the beautiful lamb shank. Look how nice they are. Pig leg right here. Have my short ribs. All right. A little bit of the stock over it, because there's all the goodness in there. All I would do, which I know would have not happened during the days of General Washington on a camp, but I can help myself to put a little bit of fresh parsley over it. I hope you forgive me, General Washington. I miss this era. Throughout his campaign in the Revolutionary War, Washington was often on the move, and one of the most important assets to Washington and his army goes unnoticed. And that is George Washington's tent.
During the Revolutionary War, Washington had a company of men known as the Commander-in-Chief's Guard, sometimes known as the Life Guard.
While they were supposed to protect my life, well, their major role was to protect headquarters.
They were really Secret Service detail and household staff for Washington during the Revolutionary War. The tents are composed of flax linen, specially woven so that it will shed water easier. There's fine woven wool binding that's dyed red that prevents the fraying of the edges of the linen. There are hundreds of little hooks and eyes, little fasteners that all had to be individually constructed from iron wire and bent to shape. And then the tent poles, which are composed of a tropical hardwood, mahogany. A lot of thought went into this. A commander-in-chief needs a quiet place to think.
You know, it was from this tent that the operations for the Continental Army were conducted. And this is where I would meet members of Congress. This is where I would meet foreign dignitaries. And so there was a lot of activity besides the fact that I slept here.
Thinking about the role of the Oval Office for a commander-in-chief, and certainly when you think about the emotions that Washington must have felt, made me start thinking, was this the first Oval Office?
French General Marquis de Lafayette was critical to the American forces' success over the British. But how he managed to get to the colonies is a story in itself. I had the honor of seeing the recreation of General Lafayette's frigate, l'Hermignon, without which Lafayette could have not met his future comrade and good friend, George Washington.
Lafayette and Washington had one of the great friendships in American history, and it's very surprising because Lafayette was a 19-year-old French aristocrat. George Washington was a 47-year-old taciturn commander of this ragtag army of Continentals. The two men remained close personal friends until the death of Washington in 1799.
When I'm not on tour filming for A Taste of History, I'm here in the City Tavern 7 days a week. And it doesn't get old, knowing that I'm in the same building where George Washington strategized the Revolutionary War and entertained many of his people. At the beginning of the American Revolution, delegates from 12 colonies met formally right here at Carpenters Hall during the First Continental Congress. However, the Founding Fathers also had a favorite unofficial meeting place a couple blocks away, the City Tavern.
The Continental Congress would come here and they could discuss what was going on up at the State House. A little more relaxed atmosphere.
They would have dinner upstairs in the long room. After dinner, they convened down here and more conversation took place over some serious ale. Cheers.
Established in 1773 by 53 prominent Philadelphia businessmen and investors, it filled a gaping void for the city's elite, who desired fine food and drink and elegant lodging.
This season, I had the opportunity to visit George Washington's whiskey distillery, where he produced close to 11,000 gallons in 1799. Over the years, I've prepared many recipes using whiskey, but I like to take a look back at Mother Washington's whiskey cake recipe, George's favorite. Diana, now it's an exciting moment. We're making the George Washington's favorite whiskey cake. So take me through.
Okay, it's a little bit of an involved recipe, but that's all right. Here we have dried crystallized ginger, candied lemon peel, candied orange peel, dried cherries, raisins, both light and dark, shredded coconut, and slivered almonds. And that's been soaking overnight in George Washington's whiskey, of course. So in here, we're just gonna whisk in our spices, 2 teaspoons approximately of clove, allspice, a little extra ginger. We'll go with a tablespoon of ginger. And if you would grind some nutmeg in here for me, just a little bit.
Because the 18th century uses nutmeg so many times in so many recipes. And again there, remember, never ever buy pre-ground nutmeg.
So good with the spices. Now we're just gonna add a teaspoon of salt, 2 teaspoons of baking soda, and a tablespoon of baking powder. So now we'll move over to our wet, traditional cake method. We need 9 eggs. There's 8 in there. Get 1 more. Fantastic. I'm just gonna break the yolks, get that started a little bit before we add our brown sugar and honey. 2 cups of brown sugar. Right in. Okay, make sure there's no lumps in your brown sugar. Now we need a 1/4 cup of honey.
1/4 cup of honey, yes, coming up.
Delicious. Our good local honey.
There we go.
Perfect. It's 2 cups of olive oil. The last thing is just a smidge of vanilla, about 1.5 teaspoons. So we'll just get this good and incorporated.
The aroma that comes out of the batter already, it's amazing.
Nice.
Think about it.
Apricot preserves. So I'm going to add this in along with our macerated fruit. Most of the liquid has been absorbed, and any extra will just add some wonderful flavor in there. We won't want to leave any bits behind. Look how beautiful. All the colors and the fragrance is incredible. Everything's coming together now. Today we're going to use our 10-inch round, which has been greased, and with a little piece of parchment in the bottom. With such a wet batter, there's definite possibility of sticking. This goes into a 325-degree oven for 45 minutes to an hour, and then you just want to make sure it'll be a little bit spongy on top. You'll know it's done when it's golden brown and beautiful. It will be very dark. Here we have the cake out of the oven.
Put a little bit more of George Washington's original rye whiskey on top. I mean, it's beautiful, and what's nice about it is the moisture. By all accounts, the winter of 1777 in Valley Forge was a really harsh one. So a fruit cake like that would most likely make it a little bit more bearable. Thanks, Diana. Fantastic job. After retiring as President of the United States, he went back to Mount Vernon. For me, to be able to cook at Mount Vernon was an unbelievable moment. I did not realize the magnitude and the size of their kitchen. Easy to understand when you know that hundreds and hundreds of people come visit him and stay overnight. But for me, a one-of-a-kind moment as I look back to all the shows we've done on A Taste of History.
This is the piazza at Mount Vernon. George Washington once described Mount Vernon as the most pleasantly situated estate in America. And when you're standing here, it's easy to see why. All around us are sweeping views of the Potomac River. In the Declaration of Independence, where Thomas Jefferson wrote of the inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, this is what George Washington had in mind, his life here at Mount Vernon on the Potomac. One of the most treasured artifacts here at Mount Vernon is the key to the Bastille, the famous French prison in Paris, which was destroyed as one of the beginning events of the French Revolution in 1789. The key was sent to General Washington by his good friend Lafayette, who was at that time in charge of some of the French forces, and it was one of Washington's most treasured possessions, symbolizing his role as sort of a hero of freedom and liberty throughout the world. He received it when he was president in Philadelphia, brought it back to Mount Vernon, and it's been hanging here ever since. This is the bed on which George Washington died in December of 1799. He had been riding around his farms, as was his custom, and the weather was very raw and cold. He caught a chill. It was some kind of throat infection which effectively strangled him. For many people, this is the much-awaited centerpiece of their visit to Mount Vernon, the very site on which the great president died.
The location of the trout and sturgeon fish farm is ideal.
Eh ben ici, c'est un élevage de truites et d'esturgeons.
He bought that fish farm with the idea of delivering live trout, and then he got into sturgeon. He has thousands of fish in here, and he raises them until he can sell them.
Qui en plus peut être
And
lucratif.
the beauty of it is, caviar comes from sturgeon, which is the ultimate goal for him eventually to get into the caviar business. Like most chefs, we really like sturgeon. Why? It's a little fatty, has a beautiful texture, and it adapts itself to many, many great recipes. And for me, on A Taste of History, I surely appreciate it because George Washington served sturgeon at least once a week. That's a first for me, that I get to hold a live sturgeon in my hand. And we're going to go back to prepare a spectacular dish. When George Washington would sit on his piazza and look out the Potomac, story has it that there were so many sturgeon that you almost would want to walk across the Potomac from back to back of the sturgeons. For Mary Randolph and the Virginia housewife, this is the exact recipe that I'm making today, that I would assure you had been here many times served right here at the Mount Vernon estate. And it's a stuffed, baked sturgeon that is cooked on top of root vegetables. So right now we're going to get started. We're going to clean this fish, which is not easy. I'm going to take the head. Now this head will make a great soup. The bones are pretty strong. Now we're going to be careful not to lose a finger. Okay, here we go. Got it right down the middle. Couldn't be better than that. So the fish is perfect and ready, completely clean, has no bones in it. Mind you, this is the little fatty part of it that gives you the great flavor. What I'm doing next right now, I'm doing a stuffing. I'm using crab meat. The crab could have been right here from the Potomac as well. Crab meat, very simple. I want to put in a lot of herbs. The herbs will make it very good, the herb crusting. I have some fresh, we call it mie de pain or breadcrumbs. Ideally, what you want to use is a fresh breadcrumb. I have chives and I have parsley already chopped. I put in there, and there you don't want to be shy at all. You can never put too much egg in it because it's going to be baked in the oven. Then you can put hot sauce in there. You can put more salt, pepper, whatever you feel like it, and a little bit of Worcestershire sauce, just a bit, not too much. And salt, be careful, because the crab meat usually, that if you buy it already cooked, usually is preserved in salt. A good amount of pepper, like about so. And then you want to mix it up gently, just like that. You're going to cut a little pocket inside here. Take the stuffing and just put the stuffing into the opening. You can be very generous with the egg because it's later going to cook in the oven and going to get nice and firm. And now what I have a variety of different vegetables, root vegetables, and also some onion. And what you want to do is you want to cut it ideally almost in the same square. You have the rutabaga. I have some red potatoes, any kind of potato you could put in there. I have celery yak, which is the root of the celery, I'm saying here. Turnip and a parsnip. And then what I add into it, I like sweet potatoes. Makes great flavor in there. So here we go. Now you want to be generous with some butter. Now for this particular recipe, could you use oil? Yeah, I would never use schmaltz. Oil would be okay, but butter would be the best for that. I will take the fish and just place it. 1, 2, 3, 4. And now comes white wine. Good amount of white wine. And we're going to have a little bit more salt on top. A little bit of pepper. And now, this great looking sturgeon, because it's so fatty and so firm, will take about a half an hour to cook. It's not like some other delicate fish that you may used to. So at a high heat, maybe 20 minutes, but could be up to a half an hour at like 375 and 400 degrees. The fish is beautiful. Now I'm getting ready to make my citrus vinaigrette to serve up the spectacular meal in honor of Mary Randolph. In the 18th century, citrus was one of the things that was really, really precious. So basically, orange lemon vinegar, some spices into it, and it's a very, very easy little dish. What makes it unique is the flavor of red shallots or red onion. Red onion has a pungent little flavor, does it extremely well. Put the red onions in here. I got some chives and some parsley already chopped. I want to put a little bit of tomato in it, not just for color, but also for the flavor. Make a small dice, like about so. The 18th century does not have yellow peppers and red peppers and green peppers, we know. There would have been a green pepper that eventually turned blush, like the one I'm having here. And it has a beautiful, unique flavor. Now what I want to do is a little bit more chives. There we go. Now, all it needs is vinegar. I use red wine vinegar for that. Nice amount of pepper. Freshly ground. And salt. Let me mix it up, and what it needs is a quick taste, making sure that, oh, I don't get better than that. So I put the root vegetables on the bottom, and then I'll take the sturgeon. I have my vinaigrette ready. Put the vinaigrette right over the fish. Now all I want to do is maybe get a little bit of any kind of greens. Maybe do some nice chervil on top. And I don't know about you, but I'm sure if you make this dish at home and you tell people there's a dish that would have been served here in Mount Vernon. It's right out of Mary Randolph's book, The Virginia Housewife. Sturgeon right here, root vegetable, beautiful, beautiful vinaigrette done with the citrus. What a fantastic meal. Right here at Martha and George Washington's kitchen at the Mount Vernon estate. What a spectacular journey that I was able to witness all the important steps of General Washington and President Washington, the foods and the locations, absolutely amazing. And not enough can be said. My gratitude to George Washington forever for a taste of history.